Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. This is your boy, the Diggity Doodah Doc, Mr. Papatoe Panther here for another edition of the weekly Nishcast, covering all the Kiwi sporting matters that tickle our toes. That's myself and the Wobbly Wildcard. And we'll chuck it up to the Wobbly Wildcard in a jiffy. First, if you do love what we're doing and you appreciate the work, the best way to support us is straight up the guts on Patreon. Just straight up the guts to us. Otherwise, we do offer a email straight to your inbox on Mondays and Fridays. So there'll be a email coming out by the time you listen to this episode of the Nishcast, and then we'll just serve something up on the Funky Friday as well. Wobbly Wildcard, big weekend. What's crack-a-lackin'?
Big weekend indeed, mate. I had because I had football on Saturday afternoon, right? So that finishes, and then I got to stay behind for a beer or two. Just a cheeky one on this occasion. To get back, Warriors are on TV, but the Warriors are slightly delayed because I got back late from footy, which means that I got to watch the Phoenix slightly delayed afterwards, which means that I got to watch the Dragons completely delayed after that because they were on at the same time. So a lot of the old My Sky got a bit of a workout on Saturday night, and it's the first time the first time I personally have had one of those kind of weekend nights, where it's just like back to back sporting action. So I missed it, but I also didn't miss it in another kind of way. I guess I don't know. I'm a very go with the flow kind of person, so maybe that was why when it wasn't there, I just accepted it wasn't there, and when it's there, I accept that it's there. But it did, it took a chunk out of my Saturday. I'll tell you that.
Sure did. There's plenty going on, especially in Aotearoa and Australia. Today, we're going to ease our way in just through the opening stanza of the episode, and then our big topics this weekend. We got NRL. We're gonna talk through the top 4 NRL teams and just touch on a few things that they're doing really well. That top 4 is the Penrith Panthers, Melbourne Storm, Parramatta Eels, and Sydney Roosters. They are doing pretty well, so we're just going to roll through those 4 teams. Obviously, got the Kiwi NRL goggles on as well, so we're going to check them out from the Kiwi NRL perspective. We have Wellington Phoenix are absolutely doing great things in the A-League. I think they are second on the ladder, which is low-key phenomenal, considering they're doing much of the same stuff that the Warriors are doing, but they're much better. And we'll finish up with a big thing on the NBL. We've got tournament season, whatever it is, awards. We're entering the playoffs. And then a little bit of Tall Blacks context around the NBL as well, the NBL as well, with the wild card dropping a couple of lads to keep a close eye on with regards to the Tall Blacks. It is albums time, wildcard, and that's where we're going to start. We're going to hit up the lounge, and we're just going to roll through a couple of pop culture things here. It is albums time. We're almost publishing our album jukebox, and what is one of your favorite albums that you've listened to this month, wildcard?
What are my favorite from this month? I don't know. This month has been kind of bonkers with a whole bunch of new stuff coming out. I've got a few that I haven't quite got around to yet. There's a Proto Martyr album, Liane Havas. I'm just going through my phone here and checking the old list. Album by Hum, coming back from a bit of a layoff for them. One of them 90s sort of shoegazy type bands with a what do you call it? Like a comeback. Where are we here? Jason Isbell put out a couple of sort of charity-esque live shows on his Bandcamp. I think the ones I would highlight in particular would be the new album from the Beths, Kiwi band coming out of Auckland, called Jump Rope Gazers. I really liked their first album. It was just sort of that kind of real upbeat, kind of I'd call it power pop, just sort of catchy guitar-based music kind of thing. They're real great hooks, real fun songs. Well, their first album was fantastic. Second album, I have, the first 2 tracks of it as good as anything they've ever done. I think it's a little bit of a different feel after that. Like the rest of it kind of, I'm not saying it's worse. It's just a bit more like expansive. Like they're trying a couple more slower songs and things like that. So I do need to listen to it once or twice more before I get my little review bit in for that, because it is slightly different than I expected, but not necessarily in a bad way. And that often is the case with those kind of things where you hear it and it's like, okay, it's not entirely what I expected, and so you're kind of thrown slightly, but then you listen to it a few more times and it grows on you, those kind of things. It feels like it has that kind of potential, so I do need to get a couple more listens on that one to get a full-on, whatever you want to call it, just a feel for it. The other one I would chuck out is there's an album, which isn't actually an album, it's being classed as a mixtape by, what would you call them? I would say indie rock with a sort of punkish edge band, Illuminati Hotties, which is a great name for a band, by the way. And they, it's mostly just this main chick. It's kind of her project. I forget her name, Sarah something or other. Not very good with remembering those kind of things. So she put out an album, the first one under the Illuminati Hotties banner, about, I think, 2018, called Kiss Your Frenemies. Great album, one of those like immediately catching kind of things, a bit of a breakout as well, and that like it got some good buzz around it. So the second album from that project, waiting for that one, supposed to come out around the time of this year, but then obviously you've had dramas throughout 2020, but on top of that you also had dramas with her, the record label there. So what happened is she bought her way out of her record contract, and I'm actually thinking of writing about this because it fills in a nice kind of line of like getting one up over the music industry, which I've seen a few times in recent years, and then historical context as well, which is always fascinating. Worked her way out of the album contract, but because of that, she had to, like, part of the deal was that her next album had to put out a certain amount of royalties back to the old label. So what happened is, instead of putting out the long-awaited second album that was supposed to be coming along, she's put out this, what she calls a mixtape, called Free IH. This is not the one you've been waiting for. So pretty clear from the title what you're getting there. And it's only about 20 minutes long, but it's so much fun, man. It's like full of that kind of energy of just like the little humorous pot shots at the music industry the whole way through. It's real like kind of rebellious tone. It's a lot of fun. A couple of absolute jams on it too. So that's probably the one I've been listening to the most over the last few days. And it is kind of one of them funky kind of like, the angle I want to write about is because the one that springs to mind is Frank Ocean, how he put out that weird ass, which the songs on Endless hold up all right, but they're not produced particularly well. And then as soon as he got that one out of the way, got out of his record deal, and then like a week later he drops Blonde, which is one of the best albums of the millennium. So like that's an obvious example. There's other ones I can remember, like I know there's a good story about the Rolling Stones getting out of their contract in the early 70s, doing something like that. They had to put out like one last single, and they didn't want to give the record label Wild Horses because they knew it was going to be a massive hit. So they wrote a quick song called Cocksucker Blues, which is not even a terrible song, but it's like very obviously designed not to be for radio. Hilarious story. There's also what do you call it? Like a never released documentary by the same name from about like a tour film from about the same time, which I've never been able to get a copy of or watch, but I might look up that now because I'm sure the internet provides everything. Anyway, that's kind of where I've been at in my head with the tunes lately. So, what have you got to offer on top of that there?
I'll just bounce off what you're talking about with the music industry, because this morning, funnily enough, I was listening to, there's a producer, Illmind, and he does a lot of stuff on YouTube. Very much, there's a way of operations that is very much influenced by Gary Vee and those type of ideals in terms of just putting music out, putting content out, and, you know, just giving people a bit extra packaged in with your music or whatever you're doing. And another leader of that kind of mindset is an artist named Russ, who came out very independent, swinging out of the gate, put everyone on blast, like the whole music industry with how he was operating, and that led to a lot of negativity and pushback. But the Illmind and Russ interview, kind of just, video session, whatever they were doing, Russ talked a lot about TuneCore, TUNCOR, which is like a great platform for independent artists to put their music out and receive revenue from it. So when you're talking about like a record label, they're the ones who own the music. If you're signed to a record label, unless you've done a very good deal, they're going to have most of the ownership rights to your music. And then that means that most of the streaming money and the nowadays streaming money, otherwise just record sales, album sales, merch sales, whatever it is, if you got a 360 deal, which is also not a good thing to be involved in. But usually the kickbacks go to the record label. Whereas nowadays, if you're an artist and you have ownership over your music, you can sign up to TuneCore. I think it's like $9.99 per song, and you keep 100% of your revenue from the streaming, financial streaming profits that you make around the world. So if you're an independent artist, all you got to do is sign up to TuneCore and make sure like people are listening to your music, make sure you're putting out great music, and then you receive 100%, as opposed to what would otherwise be like 5% if you are with a record label. So I've heard Russ talk about it before, and I've know about it previously, but it's just something I was listening to this morning, and it's a very interesting way of business in the music industry, especially when considering, like, you got to think, what does the record label do for you? Because we're in 2020, we've all got social media, so you can put your music out through social media. You can upload your music to YouTube. You can upload your music to TuneCore or another platform that puts your music automatically on Spotify, iTunes, wherever it needs to be, and then you can get 100% of that revenue. So it's very interesting, and if you are a musician listening to this, like, definitely put a lot of effort and attention into learning about the independent way of operation that is available in 2020, because I think Russ was saying, like, he makes $100K a week. The payout is weekly. So you can make a big money weekly. You've got to get big streams, obviously. Like, Russ is a worldwide artist, and any other of these artists are worldwide, but having ownership, like, I think it might have been on a Patreon podcast, I don't know, but one of my ideas coming out of the pandemic stuff, the lockdown, is ownership. Owning what you do, owning your buildings and your business, and having complete ownership over everything that you do, so that you're not reliant on other people. And then coming across what you just said there about how artists wiggle their way out of record deals. If I had the talent, I would definitely be exploring that independent avenue far more intently than like suckering up to a record label, making music that is in line with a record label. Because the other thing is, if you're an independent artist, you can release one song every day, as long as you got the work ethic, all that other stuff that I assume is the case. Whereas if you're with a record label, it's up to them. They're going to sit on that single for a couple of weeks. They're going to get a video out. They're going to have to build the marketing around it. Everything's more slow. And then you look, well, how much money am I making from that song? You might not make anything, because the record label's deal with you is such that they gave you an advance and they're keeping all the streaming revenue. And so the only way you make money is from touring and stuff like that. So it's very interesting, and very interesting that those two ideas came together this morning.
Yeah, and then like even those advances, it's like that's not free money. That's not money that they're like bribing you to for whatever. Like that money comes out of your profits on the other end. So the amount of money you get for that advance, generally, you're not seeing any of your profits until that advance has been paid back, because that's kind of the way it works. And yeah, the question you said there, that's the important one, is like, what does the record label, what does the industry itself have to offer? And it's like, it's not nothing, or else there wouldn't be a music industry, there wouldn't be record labels. They do have like, they have the connections, they have the connections on every end, like the connections from a marketing standpoint. They can book you in the biggest arenas because they know all the bookers and stuff like that. They also can hook you up with the right collaborators and get your best producers in the work, get you in the best studios, making music that sounds the best kind of thing. Often that is tricky to do because another point you raised during that is that what the record label expects the song to sound like isn't necessarily what the artist expects it to sound like. These are all kind of points that that Illuminati Hotties mixtape, as it's called, not being classed as an album. I'm not really sure what the difference is, other than that it just allows you to have I guess a little more freedom, a little more just like chucking all the paint on the canvas at once kind of thing about it, and not worrying about cohesion with the way it sounds. Similar themes in there as well, though, about like artistry versus commercialism and that kind of thing. And I think that's why I really like these stories of the people who have just flexed on their record labels. It's like you use them for what they have to offer. It's mutual up until a point, and then the point where you've suddenly, like Frank Ocean, I think, is the best example of this, because he was with Def Jam, wasn't he? I think it was, and he had like I think Nostalgia Ultra was technically a mixtape as well, wasn't it? Which is why he was able to have some of the samples that he wasn't later allowed. That Eagles one in particular. And then he obviously did Channel Orange, and Channel Orange turned him into a bit of a superstar. And then he had Blonde in the Can ready to go, and he didn't need, like, he was already a superstar at that point. He didn't need the label's help as much as they needed him. Suddenly the tables had turned, you know? And I guess at that point is the point where that's where you've got to bring out the finesse and do some creative legal things and work on some contract fulfilling offers and things like that. I'm always like reminded as well of a story about Neil Young in the early 80s, I think. So this is after Neil Young had like 10 to 15 years of being like the outstanding prolific genius that Neil Young is. His 80s period wasn't so great, as was the case with many artists of his generation. The 80s were very weird for a lot of people in that one. But he made this, so he's got a son who has, I think, cerebral palsy or something like that. And he made this album which used a lot of kind of like vocoder sounds and vocal effects and things like that. It was meant to sound kind of like sci-fi-ish. And it's called Trans. I actually think that album's really good. I think if you can get through the initial fact that it sounds different than anything you would have expected and anything else he's ever done since, I think it really holds up. And it's an album that has a deep personal connection to him, because he made it using these sounds, because this is something he found he was able to communicate with his son a lot easier with, just something his son enjoyed. And so it was this connection between them. But then he ended up getting sued by his own record label for not sounding like himself, which is one of the most outrageous record label stories you'll ever hear. I don't exactly know how that one, I can't even remember how it turned out. I'm sure he must have won that, because how could he not sound like himself when he is himself? Like, he's literally himself. He can't sound like someone else. But because the album didn't sound like what they thought a Neil Young album should, because it wasn't Harvest 2.0 or whatever. He'd already done Harvest 2.0 by then. It was probably up to Harvest 4.0. He got in trouble from the big bosses. So, yeah, I guess that's the angle. It's at the point at which it's no longer a mutual agreement. It's the point at which you got to get pretty frisky. Having said that, I still respect the hell out of people like well, I haven't rated the last couple of things he's done, but like someone like Chance the Rapper building himself up completely independent is like as much as anything. And even like Russ, who I've tried with Russ. I haven't quite got around to being in a place where I particularly like am there for his music, but I'm certainly there for for his acumen, for his music industry hustle, and respect the crap out of that. Like, that's, if you can do it alone, sweet as, like, go for it. If you can't, sometimes that just a little bit of you can massage the system in a way which it works for you up until the point where you can work for yourself on top of that with once you've got the old the profile. So I mean, there's a couple different sides of the coin there, but it's a funky old situation. It's a funky old thought to think upon.
For sure. The music that I'm listening to right now, just working on, there's a new Currency and Harry Ford project. Currency, I write about Currency every month, it feels like, because he's always releasing new music. Speaking about independent hustle, there's no one better than Currency with just what he does as a musician. And with so much music coming from Currency, it sometimes can feel like you're just getting the same shit over and over again. But there's also a vibe of like every project is slightly different. So definitely check out that Currency Harry Ford collaboration project. It's called The Outrunners. Harry Ford is a producer who's low-key, very influential in like a more underground hip-hop space. Similar to The Alchemist, not quite on The Alchemist level of the GOAT status, but very, very much doing good things. Outrunners, reasonably good project. I like it. Also been listening to Blue and Exile, another bit more underground. They usually team up quite a bit, and I don't know if it was their first project, but you know, they released an album, Blow the Heavens, way back in 2007. So that shows the roots of their collaborative efforts. And this one is called Miles. Very, you know, classic-y, hip-hop-y, boom-bap-y, feeling good. Like that. Logic has retired. He released his No Pressure album, so I'm going to listen to that over the coming days. Very interesting. Logic retiring. He's signed a deal with Twitch for a lot of money. So just to take a small tangent, you had Joe Rogan signing with Spotify for a lot of money in the podcast space, and now Twitch signed Logic. Logic has he's far bigger than music. Like he's a author, he's writing films, he's an actor, voiceover actor, you know, he loves gaming and cartoons. So I think he reached the end of his musical tenure, but it's a lot of interesting things are happening in that kind of space where different platforms are paying a lot of money to bring people to their platform who carry a certain influence. So, quite interested in the No Pressure album from Logic, and B, he's retiring to go on Twitch, and that's pretty cool. So shout out to Logic. Couple of other interesting things, Wildcard. Joey Badass released a 3-song project, which he kind of said was an album, and that was called The Light Pack, which is, you know, just good, you know, not good because Joey Badass's music is great, so more great music from Joey Badass. There was also a little 2-song drop from J. Cole, who I think... Yeah, just 2 songs from J. Cole. Late last week, I think it was. Lion King on Ice and The Climb Back. What I found interesting was The Climb Back and one of Joey Badass's songs, the one that he released a video to, let me just pull it up. The Light, very much based around death and rebirth. Very much based around, you know, coming back or... Yeah, just the concept of death and rebirth. So that's something to just keep in mind at this current time. All of which, Wildcard, reminded me that Kendrick Lamar, you know, prior to the pandemic, which is buzzy to think of right now, they dropped that PMG, or do you remember the name of it?
No, I don't. Prior to the pandemic feels like about 10 years ago, so...
I don't know. Oh my gosh. Can you just look that up for me while I just spin a yarn here, Wildcard?
I can.
So he released that just prior to the pandemic, and it was like it's an agency with David Free. He released a trailer. David Free is like a creative person, part of TDE, directs a lot of the Kendrick Lamar videos, and yeah, they dropped like a trailer or like a short film for their agency, and then everything just shut down with the pandemic. So it was terrible timing. However, in the short film for the agency thing, there are a lot of
PG Lang.
PG Lang, that's the one. No one has any idea what the fuck PG Lang is. Like
I haven't heard anything more either.
It was quite mysterious. However, we are quite, esoteric here at the Niche Cage, and I vividly remember, because I screenshotted it and I put it on our Instagram, the short film about PG Lang had a lot of like hidden subliminal meaning stuff, which is standard for artists like Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Logic, and Joey Badass, common denominator factor there. But one of the phones had 1111 as the time, which is obviously intentional, and you can do your own research on what 1111 means. So I like 30% of me pushes against the idea that it was terrible timing. Because 30% of me is like, they did this, and there were a lot of other messages in that short film, trailer, whatever it was, similar to the overall general concept that 1111 comes from. So you wonder, like, maybe Kendrick Lamar is God, and maybe he knew, or something. Like, I don't know, because, like, they released this PG Lang thing, no one knew what the fuck it was. And then there's all these, like, hidden spiritual kind of meanings in the video. And then the pandemic hits, Wildcard. So I just found that really interesting. And thinking about the new releases from guys like Joey Badass, J. Cole, Logic, who we both kind of consider the leaders of the modern hip-hop sphere, it reminded me of Kendrick Lamar and PG Lang and how fucking weird that situation was.
PG Lang is multilingual. Our community speaks music, film, television, art, books, and podcasts because sometimes we have to use different languages to get the point of our stories across. Stories that speak to many nations, many races, and many ages. That is why our writers, singers, directors, musicians, and producers break formats when we build ideas and make them real for the curious. Putting round pegs through square holes is not a process, but we embrace the idea of anarchy and challenges that make us stronger. PG Lang is focused on using our experiences and nurturing our many collaborators to build stories that are equally accessible and engaging, then fitting them within the best media. We are creators, PG Lang. And then their little logo thing. So, I mean, it's one of those very sort of internet agey kind of statements which says a lot but doesn't mean anything. I'd forgotten completely about that until you just brought that up. Hey, I mean, old King Kenny himself is supposed to be chucking out something new this year. At least that was teased at some point by one of the TDE fellas, I'm pretty sure. But we're still waiting on that. That'll be if it was bad / fortuitous / somewhere weird in between timing with the PG Lang thing, absolutely that'll be 100% perfect timing when he does release an actual album, because he's certainly not gonna throw that one out accidentally or whatever. So yeah, this was one of those sort of sit in your hands and wait and see, I guess.
One more loungy thing here, Wildcard. I saw the first few episodes of a new show, Gangs of London. Have you heard about that?
I've heard about this one.
So, as you know, and as anyone who reads our email, and maybe listeners of the Nishcast, I quite enjoy the cartel, narco, criminal world. Not partaking in, but observing and learning. So, coming fresh off like a 12 months where I've watched The Sopranos, seen a few episodes of The Wire, seen Narcos Mexico, seen El Chapo, seen Queen of the South, seen Peaky Blinders, like, just gone deep into that world. And then Gangs of London pops up. It's on Soho channel for Sky subscribers, so you can watch it pretty easily. And I think the episodes are like on demand on the Sky Go app as well. First few episodes, I think I've seen 3 episodes, not at all realistic, and that's okay. Like, if you're looking for a realistic tale of Gangs of London, which might be similar to Peaky Blinders, because there is some truth in how Peaky Blinders unfolded, and just the scene and the activities in Peaky Blinders. I think it's based loosely, obviously not everything's going to be real, but it's based loosely on a period that felt realistic. Gangs of London doesn't really feel realistic. It could be realistic because I'm not living in London. I'm not a criminal in London, and I'm not, part of the overlords ruling London. However, didn't feel realistic. It's like heavily into the violence. So a lot of that stuff is skippable because you're just getting like another shootout scene, and there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of very gruesome violence, like a guy. The whole series starts with a dude hanging from like a skyscraper or a crane in London by his feet, and then he gets lit on fire. So it's that sets the tone for like the gruesome and violence levels. First few episodes, very much more violence, more shootouts, more action than intricate storytelling. So give it a go. Just keep in mind, doesn't really feel realistic, and take that and have an open mind into what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's what I love about Peaky Blinders, is that it does have those sort of big dramatic and violent scenes, and the confrontations and stuff between the factions and all that, and like that's all there, but also pretty much each of the main, like every single one of the main characters is real fleshed out, and they've all got their own things going on, and it's just really well acted. And so I think it's like Peaky Blinders is fantastic. I love Peaky Blinders. I have been meaning. I don't think I've seen the most recent season, so I've been meaning. I actually thought I might just watch it from the start again to catch up, but
Peaky Blinders, it's not on Netflix, so I think. Well, it wasn't on Netflix. Like the most recent season wasn't on Netflix, so.
Oh, right. So that might be why I've. No, well, I mean that's not necessarily a barrier. There are other ways.
Well, I watched
but yeah,
I actually watched the 2 episodes of Gangs of London via other methods, and I've got a browser that blocks the ads, and it was so easy. Like usually you got to do the clicking the X's and getting through all the ads.
Yeah, pop-ups and
pop-ups and.
New tabs opening up. And
handy hint, there's a lot of browsers out there that don't show ads. Like if you're going to read something on the niche cache, maybe click an ad or just open up using the ads, or support us on Patreon. So we do, there's a bit of financial help there. But handy hint, if you're going to watch something illegally, do so using a browser that blocks ads, because it makes it seamless, much easier. One more thing about Gangs of London and Peaky Blinders. The main character in Gangs of London is one of the Shelby sons. The middle one? The dude who gets shot outside his house. Like outside his country house.
The younger one, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, the third oldest.
It's not the main fella, and it's not the one who looks like Blair Tickner. It's the other one.
That's a very good description. Yeah, the third oldest, second youngest. So he's the
old Shelbys.
He's the main dude in Gangs of New York. Beautiful wildcard. We'll get into our big topics here. We'll just quickly roll through a few things. Robert Whittaker had a good win over Darren Till yesterday, UFC Fight Island. I think it's the last Fight Island event until they go back there, maybe in the future. It was a decision win to Whittaker. Very good fight. They very technical, very skillful. And they both said that it was very stressful, which is interesting. Like, these two dudes are very good dudes, very friendly and knockabout blokes. They both said it was very stressful because they always had to be full alert. And it was a fight where you wanted to lure the other fighter in to set a trap, and so you had to be on point all the time because there was very high level striking going on, and they were setting traps, faking, feinting, doing all sorts of things. So very handy win for Robert Whittaker. And one little note here that I'll leave you with is the takedowns of Robert Whittaker. Didn't see many takedowns, if any takedowns, versus Israel Adesanya, and that fight didn't go the distance. And Israel Adesanya, city kickboxing fighters, are very good at avoiding takedowns. Not only did Whittaker outstrike Darren Till, who's from Liverpool, significant strikes. Whittaker had 69 of 157. Till had 41 of 99, so Robert Whittaker outstruck him. But he also landed 2 takedowns, and Darren Till didn't even attempt any takedowns. So it was a good performance from Whittaker as far as bouncing back and showcasing his vast array of skills, considering he qualified for the Australian Commonwealth Games wrestling team, and he's anyone who's watched his fights knows how powerful, awkward his striking is. So great win for Robert Whittaker in the UFC. Also, got some NBA scrimmages happening. Who really gives a fuck about the scrimmages? We'll see what happens come NBA restart in the bubble. How are you feeling, Wildcard, just about Steven Adams? Early days in the bubble. He played a game yesterday, or over the weekend, I think. He's got another scrimmage game coming up, so it's hard to, break down his scrimmage performances. Just hard and fast here, how are you feeling about Steven Adams about a week, almost 2 weeks out from the return of the NBA?
Yeah, they've played 2 scrimmage games now, the Thunder, and no one cares about results or about who scores the points or whatever. That's really this is NBA preseason in a bubble. It's even less meaningful than it would be for a normal preseason. So it doesn't matter. It's just about getting people sort of a bit of rhythm going up again. But having said that, what I have heard out of I've watched bits and pieces. I've seen clips. I haven't watched any actual games because for the reasons I just stated, I honestly don't really care about scrimmage games. But from what I have heard from sort of OKC-based journalists who have been watching it and keeping a close eye on the team, it sounds like Steven Adams is absolutely fizzing for it. When you think back to how his season had gone, this is a strong OKC team. That's the team that's performed much, well above expectations. They've been extremely good as a clutch shooting team, which makes sense when you've got a fella called Chris Paul on your team, who is having just a resurgent season himself. You got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander playing very well. You got a lot of sort of solid role players around them. Potentially a little bit of a lack of depth to some of them. But that's sort of also what you expect from a team like this. Danilo Gallinari shooting 3-pointers and being a steady scorer the whole way through. And then also the factor to remember from coming into this bubble now is that Andre Robertson's back. Andre Robertson, who's missed something 2 years or something from with coming back from a very serious leg injury. He's back, and he's even had a 3-pointer this morning, I think, and he's a guy like him, as long as he's got most of his athleticism, and they've held him back for a long time, so you'd hope he's had he seems good to go, and it's a big happy-go-lucky story about him. He just seems to be beaming from ear to ear, and the teammates are happy to have him back. He's a well-liked guy. He's also an absolutely lockdown defender, one of the smartest, one of the most Instinctive as well, just on-ball defenders. He knows exactly where to be. He's got long arms. He's going to disrupt you. He's a very tricky player who could add that extra, just little bit of defensive steel to the Thunder that tips them just a little bit better. Like, they might have improved upon that, but then also another aspect they could well have improved in is Steven Adams personally. Like, aside from the good, like the feel-good story about how the Thunder had been going prior to the lockdown, Steven Adams had been a little bit up and down, and he'd had a couple injuries that he'd played through, and he'd missed a few games early in the season, and he was so good in preseason. Another example that preseason doesn't really matter at all. The wins don't count, but he looked the goods. He passed all the eye tests, looked like he was going to be a dominant player, but then had those early injuries and never quite got a full-on rhythm. It sounds like he's playing like back to where he was in actual preseason beforehand again. It sounds like he's looking light on his feet. He's strong and dominant. He's playing confidently and all those things which you want to see from Steven Adams. You don't always see it as much as anything because he's just happy to do his role and facilitate for others and just set those heavy screens and things like that. But he's capable of being a more prominent scorer than he has been as well at times, and maybe if you just add a little bit more of that to him, then if he's just used the break to get like fully fit again, feeling like ready to go, no injuries whatsoever, nice and recovered from everything, he could actually be one of those players who comes out of the lockdown and like steps it up to a whole nother level, which in turn, add in Andre Robertson's return, add in Chris Paul playing as well as he has with some of the guys around him, Steven Adams steps it up. That's a lot to be excited for the OKC Thunder, to be honest.
There's a lot more to be excited, specifically in the bubble, with the Oklahoma City Thunder compared to the Brooklyn Nets at this stage wildcard. We also have Sonny Bill Williams coming back. It appears fairly likely that he's going to sign with the Sydney Roosters, and I wrote this in the email today, wildcard, because I was listening to the Triple M Saturday show, and they had interviews with Brandon Smith. Brandon Smith's interview was hilarious. That dude is fucking funny. He's just a fantastic human being, and someone who I reckon is a lot smarter than people think or would make him out to be. I must have chucked it up somewhere, but we would have discussed it previously. You know how they have the little fan clips with Fossey as part of the Fox Sports kind of coverage?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So he was interviewing Brody Croft, and then Brody Croft said something about how Brandon Smith pulls all these facts out of his ass, and he said that trees talk to each other, which we have discussed as being like for certain true.
Yeah, literally true, provable scientific fact.
Yeah, and then obviously Aussie NRL culture, they blow it off as like, oh, the pot plant can't talk and that sort of shit. But
well, yeah, that's true. Pot plants can't talk because they don't have their roots in the same soil. But trees in a forest, yeah, they do.
We can get technical there, wildcat.
Well, yeah, true.
We won't because we're not botanists or whatever it's called. But point being, Brandon Smith and Mitchell Moses did little interviews, and they both spoke glowingly of Sonny Bill in a way that felt a lot like how the younger NBA players spoke about Kobe Bryant and still speak about Kobe Bryant, which unfortunately was put in the spotlight by Kobe Bryant's death. And, we here on Earth, we don't give people their roses while they're alive. So many young NBA players spoke publicly and revered Kobe Bryant before his death, but it was put in bright lights how celebrated Kobe Bryant is and was by the younger generations. I reckon there's a lot of similarities there with Sonny Bill and how younger athletes view Sonny Bill like he's a deity. He's a completely different specimen of human being, and maybe the older generation don't quite see that because they just see someone hopping around different codes. They see someone, there's people who still hold him accountable to the Bulldogs situation. We've talked a lot about Sonny Bill previously and how we both greatly appreciate who he is and what he's done. Like it's absolutely mind-boggling how one athlete can be a winner and perform at the highest level in either code and still be an alright boxer. But I just found that extra wrinkle over the weekend wildcard, and I think it's quite telling. Like, I think there's a lot of younger NRL players who view Sonny Bill Williams in a similar way that younger NBA players view Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, that's a pretty fascinating comparison, actually. I'm just thinking about the ways and like the many ways in which that's true. While you're saying all that, because I think there's an element of Kobe that Sonny Bill doesn't have, which is the sort of he doesn't have the carbon copy of the Mamba mentality. He has his own version of that, which is equal and the parallel, but it's not quite that same ruthless efficiency kind of thing. Well, efficiency is not the right word to use about Kobe, but just that ruthless determination, we'll say. But Sonny Bill had a ruthless determination in his own way. Definitely blazed his own trail, and in a way which has been pretty I think both of those two, you wouldn't necessarily say they changed the way the game was played, but they encapsulated the way the game was played during their eras, which made them therefore just the poster childs for those eras. Kobe Bryant, what he did with the Lakers in the early 2000s pretty obviously speaks for itself. Sonny Bill as well. Sonny Bill, he didn't. He probably went a long way to get in the shoulder charge band, but if you think about how he played early on, but it's very definitive of that era. I think he wasn't the first player to be back rower size with the skill sets of a outside back kind of thing. It wasn't the first to do that, but he was maybe the best to do that, which is the similar thing with Kobe Bryant. It's like Kobe Bryant was just trying to play like how Michael Jordan played, but in a post-Michael Jordan world where everyone was trying to play how Michael Jordan played, Kobe Bryant was arguably the best at it, the best at that style of basketball. Have different arguments about players in different positions, whether they could, whether someone like Tim Duncan or Dirk Nowitzki or Steve Nash or whoever how they compare to Kobe Bryant. Just as players, you can do exactly the same thing with Sonny Bill and players in other positions. But for that role, for that style of play, which was kind of the way to play, Sonny Bill at the Bulldogs era of NRL was all about them big hits, and Sonny Bill was the biggest hitter. So, that's guaranteed. If you can be that kind of spotlight person, that's guaranteed to have an influence on all the players coming through. And I guess that's why Kobe's passing was such a shocking thing to the NBA community, was because you had players in their prime right now who grew up watching Kobe Bryant. It's not someone like I don't want to say someone like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Bill Russell because they're still alive. But let's say someone like Wilt Chamberlain, for example. He died relatively young, but he died a while ago, probably about 60. The players who grew up playing against him were all retired. The players who grew up watching him on TV, well, I don't know what the broadcast rights were like back in those days, but when he was the star guy, those players had probably retired by then. It's a massive impact on the league, but it's not a massive impact necessarily on the the epicenter of the impact isn't right in the core of the NBA like it was right now for in the year 2020 for Kobe Bryant. And Sonny Bill, thankfully still out there doing great things and hopefully will live a very, very long life, not comparing them in that matter. But Sonny Bill's impact was as a young player, in the NRL. He came back and won titles and did amazing things, but the initial impact was for players who are probably now coming into their primes. They were 10 years old watching him then, so I think just the timing of him coming back, I don't know that he'll offer much to the Roosters on top of what they already got, but you don't not sign Sonny Bill Williams if you have the choice. He's going to come in and be just an incredible help to the culture, to the team, just a guiding light for the young players. It's exactly what you do. And I guess someone like, Kobe Bryant's post-career as well was very much as a mentor, wasn't he? In a lot of different ways. Mentor as a father, obviously, a mentor as a coach, mentor in his, ambassadorship for the WNBA and things like that, and sitting courtside with his daughter and all those kind of things, with his TV work as well. Like it's, I can see a lot of ways in which that comparison stacks up, eh?
Just on the mentoring bit there are some young Kiwi NRL Roosters who wouldn't have been there the last time Sonny Bill was there. Like Isaac Liu and Tokiaho were there, but the Roosters didn't have Joey Manu. They didn't. Well, they might have had them in the junior setup, and that's what I'm just wondering is like how much they would have felt Sonny Bill back then. But definitely now, you got Joey Manu, you got Sitili Tuponuia, you have Poasa Fa'amasili. Those are guys in the NRL squad, in the NRL team for the Roosters most weeks who would be, just from a Kiwis perspective, or not a Kiwis perspective, but like from an Aotearoa perspective, would benefit greatly from being around Sonny Bill. A lot of, unfortunately, /fortunately, if he plays, Asu Kepaoa is moving from the Roosters to West Tigers. Apparently he had signed that deal for next season. That's now in effect immediately. And Asu Kepaoa is a very talented outside back from Auckland who is with the Roosters, so he's moved to the West Tigers to make way. Not salary cap, but just like top 30. And this flows into the NRL top 4 discussion, so we might as well start here, wildcard, with the Roosters who are 4th. So, unfortunately, Asu Kepaoa moves away from the Roosters. Like, I want to see those young players in the best systems. Not talking negatively about the Tigers system, because they do have Michael Maguire as coach, and he's the Kiwis coach, and that's good. But the Roosters invested a lot in Asu Kepaoa. He's a tall, rangy outside back. Couldn't crack the NRL team, most likely because the Morris brothers came in, and Matt Ikuvalu has done a nice job on the wing. So just keep that in mind with the aftermath of Sonny Bill's arrival at the Roosters. It might emerge as a great thing for a young bloke like Asu Kepaoa who moves to the Tigers and might get a bit of game time there. The Roosters have a lot of Kiwi NRL juniors, though. They have Christian Tuipulotu, who is one of the best prospects out of Aotearoa. The Roosters took him off the Warriors. He was in the Warriors system. You also have the Graham Telfer, I think, twins, who are both playing in the Roosters Jersey Flag team, I think it was. They are Marist Saints juniors, and one's a fullback, one's a centre winger, and they're twins, and they're both in the same Jersey Flag team. So you got a lot of dudes like that, let alone Fa'amasili, let alone Tuponuia, who Sonny Bill is one of his amazing traits, whether it's being a leader for the Muslim community, and the Muslim community in sports in Australia and Aotearoa, or a leader of the Polynesian community, because he's very big on empowering Polynesian people. And those juniors and younger players at the Roosters, they're all Māori, they're all Polynesian. So you're going to hear a lot about the impact and effect as far as professionalism goes. But I also think a low-key aspect of that is Sonny Bill relating to the likes of Tuponuia, Fa'amasili, Christian Tuipulotu, the Graham Telfer twins, and connecting with them is going to be very important for the Roosters moving forward. With regards to what the Roosters, everyone knows that the Roosters are a very good footy club, very good footy team. One thing I am keeping an eye on with regards to Kiwi NRL involvement, it's very hard to assess their strongest forward pack, because, most weeks you're going to have Wairea, Hargraves, Siosua, Tokiaho starting, but then Trent Robinson, the Roosters coach, does a great job of rotating his middle forwards and forwards in general, because Tuponuia, he comes off the bench, he plays through the middle, I think he started this week's game against the Warriors on an edge. So they have different ways of tinkering with their rotations, with their playing team. Yeah, Tuponoia played 80 minutes on the edge. So usually he's getting 25, 30 minutes playing through the middle coming off the bench. And that's just an example of how the Roosters under Trent Robinson, they have a lot of different ways of ensuring that guys are getting game time and that guys are getting rest. Because come finals time, if you have a couple of injuries or suspension, which is incredibly likely in a brutal sport like rugby league, you might be required to play Tuponoia, Fa'amasili, Lindsay Collins, Nat Butcher, these guys. You're highly likely, given the ins and outs of rugby league, to have to rely on those dudes come finals time. So how do you prepare them? You have to give them game time. You have to ensure that they're ready. Even more so in 2020 when there's no reserve grade as well. And that's something that Trent Robinson does very well. And you had someone like Isaac Liu. He started in the middle for this game. He played 52 minutes. And that was the first game he started this season. Prior to round 10, which was the week before, he hadn't played over 40 minutes in a game. Last two games, he's played 43 minutes and 52 minutes. Trent, of course, there's injury factors at play here, but also with the Roosters, I'd strongly suggest that their injuries aren't necessarily injuries all the time. It might just be an injury relayed to the news, he injured his ankle at training. Okay, cool. But he might just be getting a rest this week as well. You got to keep an open mind with that with regards to the Roosters and how they look after their players. So I'm very interested in the Roosters forward pack and because that's where the bulk of the Kiwis are. The win against the Warriors had Wairau Hargraves, Tokiaho, Isaac Liu, Satili Tuponoia, Pawasa Fa'amasili, all getting game time there. So enjoying the Roosters, enjoying their forward pack, and everyone just knows that they're a very good footy team. And from a Kiwi NRL perspective, it's all about how those lesser-known forwards are contributing to a very good team.
Yeah, and we're talking about the top four here, so there's a little bit of a gap between the top three and the Roosters, who are 4 points back on 14 points. They've won 7, they've lost 4. Deceptive in that is that they lost their first 2 games before, at the start of the season, before all the lockdowns, so they're actually 7-2 since then, and just a ridiculous, the plus 160 points difference is comfortably the best of any team, and yet they don't have the best record. For a team that's only won 3 more games than they've lost over the course of the full season, to be at plus 160 is just frightening, in that it shows you something very relevant about the Roosters, which is that they know how to get it done. They're just such a ruthless team, and I granted 59 of those 160 points came at once when they walloped on the old the Broncos, and I think they demolished the Bulldogs the week after that, if my memory serves me right too. But you put away the bad teams, and then even when they don't play to their potential, they still generally find a way to win, ignoring those first couple rounds. The game against the Warriors was quite eerie for me, because it was so similar to the game that the Roosters played against the Dragons about a month ago, where that was a game where the Dragons were just on their it was the first game the Dragons had played after they'd gone on that I think it was 3-game win streak, finding a bit of form, Ben Hunt playing at dummy half. And the Roosters were coming in with a few injuries. They didn't have Tedesco that game. I think Joey Manu played at fullback, and it just felt like there was potentially a little bit of an open door for the Dragons, who were finding some form to be able to win a game like that. And 50 minutes into it, the Dragons were leading 12-10, and went on to lose 26-12. Like, it's just, at that point of the game, like 15 minutes in, you're 10 minutes into the second half, you're playing against a team that isn't on the top of their game for various reasons, and this is your opportunity. You're finding some form, you're feeling good about things, and then they just, in the last half hour, they just blow you off the park, and the Dragons made some dumb mistakes, which they want to do at the best of times anyway this season, but, like, the Roosters took full advantage, rolled them over the last half hour, comfortable victory. Well, 10 minutes into the second half against the Warriors were leading 10-6. And I remember saying while I was watching it, like, careful now, because this is exactly what's going to happen. This is exactly what the Dragons did when they played them. Like, it felt like there was this arm wrestle of a game, and the Battlery team in the contest was maybe going to, having a small lead if they could just continue the way the game was going. Nah, that's not how it works. Roosters flick it up to another couple gears and then run away with it, in this case 18-10, but you never felt, once the Roosters took the lead, you never really felt the Warriors were going to score again anyway. So just that's a sign of a good team, is when they can, when they're on form, they're obviously scintillating and they're just going to destroy a team and nothing much you can do about it. But when they're grinding it out, they still have that extra gear to go to. They still know how to pull it out of the bag. They still know how to get that victory in tough circumstances, even when they're under strength or they're perhaps just not quite playing to full capacity. And I mean, that's how you ride your way up the top of the ladder, as well, as by just churning out those kind of results. And it's frightening to see from a team that's won the last 2 championships, and already as it is. Might be another Kobe Bryant comparison with Sonny Bill there as well if they do the three-peat.
Or Kobe was there for all of them, so
true. Because Sonny Bill would only be there for the last quarter of the last one.
One more thing about the Roosters is value for money. Like, of course, shitty thing about the NRL, no idea what kind of money these players are on. Like, of course it's reported, but who the fuck knows? Let me run through their 17 from the Warriors World Cup, and just big money, medium money, value for money. Tedesco, big money. Ikavalu, value for money. Josh Morris, value for money. Joseph Manu, medium. Brett Morris, value for money. Luke Keary, I think, would be in the medium value at the moment. He's playing for a bigger deal. Kyle Flanagan, value for money, considering he's a starting halfback. Wairea Hargraves, medium money. Jake Friend, medium money. Tokiaho, medium money. Orbison, value for money. Isaac Liu, value for money. Lachlan Lamb, value for money. Tupanuia, value for money. Nat Butcher, value for money. Lindsay Collins, value for money. Poasa Fa'amasili, value for money. Of course, there's no Angus Crichton, there's no Boyd Cordner there. But if you're wondering about the Roosters' mythical salary cap stuff, it's a myth. The Roosters get exceptional value for money, not just like with the Morris twins, but their forward pack. Orbison, Liu, Lachlan Lamb coming off the bench in a utility role. Tupanuia, Nat Butcher, Lindsay Collins, Fa'amasili. None of those dudes are on anything close to big money, but they get great value out of those players. So shout out to the Roosters for that. Quickly here, Wildcard, we'll just up the tempo a bit. The Parramatta Eels. Good team, like what they're doing, but of course, I'm focused in on Dylan Brown. For me, when I think about the Eels, when I watch the Eels, I only care about Dylan Brown because this dude is a gun. This dude is really, really good at rugby league. He is the only half in the top 50 for run meters. Granted, he is 50th. I think he's slid a bit from the weekend's performances, but he is the only half in the top 50 for run meters. That's crazy. Also, doesn't miss too many tackles, Wildcat. So he is tackling at 92.6%. Compare that to Mitchell Moses. Mitchell Moses is tackling at 78.9%. So Dylan Brown runs the footy kind of like a madman. Like, he's an exceptional runner of the footy, and he barely misses tackles. He's played all 11 games, and only 2 games has he missed 3 or more tackles. He hasn't actually missed more than 3 tackles in a game, but 2 games he's missed 3 tackles. 2 games he's missed 2 tackles, and 4 games he's missed 1 tackle. 3 games he's missed no tackles. So, quite simply, Dylan Brown is the best running half in the NRL as far as run meters go. Last 5 games, he's had over 100 running meters. Also, very good tackling half. I'm not sure if he's the best. Very, very good. And that's just hallmark gun half indicators right there. So shout out to Dylan Brown. And there's actually, between Dylan Brown and James Fisher-Harris with the Penrith Panthers, Northland has 2 of the best Kiwi NRL players in the game right now. So I'd strongly suggest if you watch the Parramatta Eels and you're kind of wondering like what makes the Parramatta Eels good, you're going to hear the commentators talking about Mitchell Moses. You're going to hear the commentators talking about Clint Gutherson. You're going to hear about, Regan Campbell, Gillard, Junior Paulo, Nathan Brown. Very good middle forward crew. They got Ryan Madison. They got Sean Lane. They got Reed Mahoney doing great things at dummy half. But if you're listening to this and you're from Aotearoa, know that Dylan Brown is a huge factor in how well the Eels are doing. This kid is like 19, 20 years old, biggest run meters of any half in the NRL, and he loves to tackle. He's had 2 games with less than 20 tackles out of 11 games, and he's tackling at over 90%. Dylan Brown's really good and doesn't get the attention because the Eels have generally a very good team. But my observations are that Dylan Brown is an exceptional young half in the NRL.
Yeah, I love watching Dylan Brown play. I haven't seen the Eels. I haven't watched them for a couple of weeks, so I might have to see who they got this week, actually. Sunday afternoon against the Bulldogs. That's a nice, tasty one for a couple of reasons. Nice timing, and also a good opportunity for Dylan Brown to be Dylan Brown. I've loved watching him play throughout the season. I had him on when we did our power rankings post-lockdown thing on a couple podcasts ago. I had him on my list. It's been a real breakout season for him, and it's true that he doesn't quite get the recognition because he plays around a couple big name Australian playmakers, but that's kind of the perfect role, for a young half coming through. That's kind of exactly what you want. Like, you get the freedom and the room to express yourself, to play well, to be an influence on games, but you also, you don't have the same pressure and spotlight because you got veterans, or, guys close to veteran status at least, guys who've been around long enough to know what they're doing, and fellas like Moses and Gutherson, who will protect you from a lot of that spotlight as well, and provide you with that freedom. Is kind of a perfect way to be, and it's on a contending team as well. Like a team that made a good run in the playoffs last year, a team that's hoping to do better this year. Like, it's kind of the perfect platform. Like, if you're going to script a breakout season for a young half, this is kind of how you do it, eh? Like, the only way you can make it better is if you put him at if you made it, change the title of the script slightly and put him at the Roosters or the Storm or something like that, just a club that have more of a legacy. But I mean, the Eels, I got a bit of belief in the Eels this season. They're obviously doing well, because we're talking about our top 4 teams, and they're right here in 3rd place. And I've got belief they could make a playoff run. I can see it happening. They came. Where did they get last year? Was it the semi-finals or the just before that? I can't remember, but they've got that part of the equation when people say you got to go on a run and lose before you know how to win it, deep in those kind of things. Well, they've had something like that as well. So, I believe in the Eels this season. I'm not saying they will do that, but I'm saying I believe that they're certainly capable of it.
You mentioned the Roosters' points differential, but the Eels have conceded 134 points. Melbourne Storm have conceded 136, and that's considerably better than the other teams, Roosters and Panthers. Yeah, sure. Like,
Yeah, best defense in the comp by points allowed for the Eels. 2 points better off than the Storm.
yeah, and like, sure, like, it takes a team effort, whether it's like defensive strategy or middle wrestling and just everyone being able to tackle. But having one half who is a very good defender at least allows you to like, it allows you a greater chance of locking down that left edge where Dylan Brown plays. So, in a very good defensive team, perhaps the best defensive team, Dylan Brown is an exceptional defensive half. And that is notable. Like, always, as you said, like, such performances in a high-performing team, very notable. Melbourne Storm, like the Roosters, just keep rolling on, doing great things, and I've had a thought in my head, Wildcard, like, the Storm have the 3 best dummy halves in the NRL. They got Cameron Smith, Brandon Smith, and Harry Grant. All I want to say about that is that is a very Melbourne Storm problem. Where you've got the 3 best dummy halves in the competition. Brandon Smith's one of the best dummy halves because he is the Kiwis dummy half. Like, shout out to him. Harry Grant's doing great things with the West Tigers. Cameron Smith's the GOAT. So that's just a very, very Melbourne Stormy problem to have. So, well, shout out to them. Couple of things. Jesse Bromwich, not quite. He hasn't played a few games, and I just wonder. I don't know if I've got this theory that Jesse Bromwich, his style, because you think of guys like James Graham, Jared Wallace, like those type of forwards who the game might have just passed with the change in rules and stuff like that. Jesse Bromwich his late footwork and mobility was really, really standout in the NRL over the past decade. And now I'm not like, is Jesse Bromwich suddenly washed? That's not what I'm talking about here. Without Jesse Bromwich in the team right now, I'm just wondering, what is his influence on the Melbourne Storm heading into the finals? What are his stats going to look like? What's his role going to look like for the Melbourne Storm? Because that's just going to be fun to watch. It's like how Jesse Bromwich's career progresses, and you know, the Melbourne Storm will put a lot of work with Jesse Bromwich into ensuring that he continues to develop new skills and improve and stuff like that. So, interested in what Jesse Bromwich does leading into the finals and how he contributes to the Storm. Kenny Bromwich is just locked down one edge spot, playing 80 minutes there every week. Brandon Smith is amazing. He's a prop. Holy shit. What the fuck? That's amazing. And later in the year, he'll just go play dummy half for the Kiwis, as I said. The one to watch with the Melbourne Storm wildcard, like obviously, like the Roosters, we all know the Melbourne Storm, great team. You can talk all day about Munster, Pappenhausen. Nelson Soft-Solomon has been very good as well off the bench. But Jerome Hughes he's got 9 try assists in 9 games. And there's a bunch of players, Cameron Smith, Hughes, Jerome Luai, Chad Townsend. They're all tied for 4th in try assists. However, Jerome Hughes has only played 9 games. So Cameron Smith's played 11 games. Luai has played 11 games. Townsend's played 10 games. So Hughes has the best ratio there. And he's playing really well. I like watching Jerome Hughes with the Melbourne Storm. He's settled into that halfback role. Just making you wonder, like, who is Brodie Croft? Because he's going nowhere with the Brisbane Broncos, and Jerome Hughes is, like, he was a fullback. He has been moved around everywhere for the Melbourne Storm. Right now, starting halfback most weeks. And he's doing really good things. Like last week against the Broncos was the first game in 5 games. He had a 5-game streak of try assists. And then he didn't have any against the Broncos. So that's where his try assist numbers come from. He's had tackle busts in all of his past 5 games. He's had over 100 running meters in 4 of his last 5 games. He's just doing really good things for the Melbourne Storm. And when you think about like how to defend the Melbourne Storm, holy shit, Pappenhausen just popped up over there. Holy shit, we can't actually tackle Munster because he's fending us everywhere, bouncing off left and right feet. And Jerome Hughes is like he's a natural footballer. He's fast, he's agile, he's got great footwork. He can kick, he can pass. Not quite as X-factory as Munster or Pappenhausen. But if you're wondering like how to stop the Melbourne Storm and where their threats are coming from, you can't overlook Jerome Hughes. And Melbourne Storm are just still a great watch from a Kiwi NRL perspective.
The Jerome Hughes versus Brodie Croft thing reminds me of a team that we from a different sport that we compare to the Melbourne Storm very often. Sort of how like in those golden age San Antonio Spurs teams, every like time they went on a playoff run, there'd be some like 1 or 2 of those just excellent 3-and-D type players that they just seem to have on rotation. Like there was always just another one coming through. Just a guy who didn't quite reach the heights at another team, or maybe a fella they've been working on for a couple years out of the draft, come in, and there'll be like just one finals game or something where one of those guys would hit like someone like a Danny Green, or Danny Green is slightly above this level that I'm talking about, would just come in and like hit 7 3-pointers or something like that in a match-winning performance, just to make sure they got one of those 4 games when the Duncan, Parker, Ginobili, etc. guys maybe weren't quite at the same level, just for that one drop, and that's ends up helping them towards another title or at least another deep playoff run or something like that. And then those kinds of players would then get offered a big money contract with another team, and they'd never be quite the same because it's just not quite the same on a different team. Like I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on with this. Also, just with the Storm, it's like at the lockdown, they'd won their first 2 games. They'd ground out a couple. Where are we? An 18-4 win over the Sea Eagles away. They'd ground out a 12-10 win away to the Sharks. And then big rule changes come in during lockdown. The restart happens. They get beaten at home 22-6 by the Raiders. There's a bit of conversation that maybe the Storm are gonna like the Storm who really like incorporated the wrestling aspects of tackling and slowing down the ruck and these kind of things. Very good with the old dark arts. Cameron Smith is the referee whisperer and all these kind of things. Perhaps that Storm team just isn't going to be able to cope with the way the league is going, with the way the game's evolved, with the new interpretations of the set restarts and all these kind of things, and the quicker paced game and all this. Well, there's 7-1 since they've beat, including wins against the a rebound win against the Raiders a couple weeks ago. They've beaten the Roosters in that time, and they just continually look like the Storm always do. Like it's just one of those, they found an answer regardless. People tried to write them off, and it's again another San Antonio Spursy thing. Although at a couple years previous, because the actual Spurs this season gonna miss the playoffs for the first time in about 20 years. So pour one out for Greg Popovich. They'll probably win a title next year. A couple a slightly higher draft pick, a couple good free agent signings. is still a pretty decent team. But yeah, like this Melbourne Storm once again found a way, and they're right up there competing for potentially a minor premiership, competing to go deep in the playoffs, and just Melbourne Storm being Melbourne Storm. People tried to write them off, and they said no deal.
Definitely no deal in writing off the Melbourne Storm. Penrith Panthers are top of the table, and there are a couple of interesting pieces here. Caleb Aikens started at fullback. He's another Northland product, and he's alright. He's always puts up big numbers, but he's just not quite as dynamic as Dylan Edwards, but he does a job. He does a job whenever Dylan Edwards is out, and is still learning the art, and that's fine. That's what you need as a top 4 team. You need to be able to replace players, as we've talked about. They also have Moses Leota's doing a nice job off the bench. You got Jerome Luai. playing on the left edge, doing a good job. But the big one here, wildcard, is James Fisher-Harris, and he is dominant. He is, like, amazingly dominant. He's played all 11 games. And in all 11 games, he has played over 50 minutes. In all 11 games, he has run for over 150 meters. He only made 16 tackles against the Titans, so that dented his stats. However, he is tackling in the middle of the field at 92.1%. Bit easier to tackle in the middle of the field because you got your bros beside you, but you're making a lot of tackles, and if you're making a lot of tackles at 92.1%, happy days. Big post-contact meters, doesn't mind an offload as well. James Fisher-Harris is just in the form of his life, and the reliability and consistency that he offers the Penrith Panthers through the middle, like, that's so important when you're considering how Nathan Cleary plays. And there was no upper side Codicil this week, but getting quick play the balls and just always generating momentum. So important for the Penrith Panthers. And every year, James Fisher-Harris has got better. Every year, he reaches a different level. And, like, James Tamo's in that forward pack, and he does a good job, Jimmy Tamo. But it feels to me like James Fisher-Harris is like the spiritual leader of the Penrith Panthers in a sense of what, like, he dishes up every single week. And when you think about the middle trio of the Panthers, James Tamo, Fisher-Harris, Isaac Yeo, very mobile. Isaac Yeo's he started as like a center, second row edge forward. So he's got the footwork, he's got the mobility. Fisher-Harris he genuinely looks like a monster, but he moves like a center. And that's important when you're thinking about the NRL 2020, how it's played. So Dylan Brown is right there. However, I would consider James Fisher-Harris like the Kiwi NRL MVP of the first 11 rounds of 2020.
There we go. I don't entirely know what to think of the Panthers. I haven't probably watched enough of their games to get a complete feel for how they're going, but they're top of the table. They're and they're clear at the top of the table as well. They're because by virtue of that draw, they've only lost once this season actually, which I think was to the Eels. I was just looking at that before we were talking. They were the team that gave Melbourne that one as well in that 7-1 streak that they're on. Melbourne have won 5 games in a row. Penrith have won 6 in a row. That's the longest active winning streak in the NRL at the moment. That's how they're sitting top with 9 wins, a draw, and a loss from their 11 games. Not considering they've won 9 times as many games as like the 9-1 win-loss ratio. It's a little bit surprised their points difference isn't higher, so maybe that's a little bit of a clue that they could be overperforming. I don't know, but then I looked at their fixture list and it doesn't really look like they've got a I'll check for you, but I think they only play I'm not sure they play any of those other top 4 teams again for the rest of the way. They do have the Eels in round 18. That's the only other one of these 4 teams we're talking about that they still have to play again. Like I said, they've beaten Melbourne. I think did they beat the Roosters as well? I think they might have. They did in round 1. So, I mean, it's not quite an open path because the NRL is the NRL. Anyone can beat anyone on their day. Even the bloody Bulldogs won a game this week, didn't they? But the Panthers have carved out a nice little like stretch for themselves to finish the season really, really well over the second half of things. And I mean, I don't know if I'd call them favourites because again, like I just don't know if they've quite got the backlog of reliability that the other 3 teams, for example, that we've talked about here have. But I mean, results-wise, what they've like points on the board, you can't doubt them. And looking at what's to come, you also got to think there's a minor premiership contention in the very least, like at the very least contention for them. Is bloody, I don't know, they're very well placed, aren't they?
definitely are. And one thing I thought about with the Warriors is there's no one with speed. There's no one who runs fast. Occasionally, Cody Nikarima runs fast, and that's it. When you're watching the Penrith Panthers, holy shit. Josh Mansour, Speedy Gonzalez, Nathan Cleary's pretty quick, Jerome Luai's pretty quick. Apisai Coruscant at hooker is pretty quick. Dylan Edwards at fullback, pretty quick. Their forwards are mobile, nimble, agile, pretty quick. Stephen Crichton is like X-Factor personified. And I think that's working out for the Penrith Panthers at the moment. Radio Wildcard, we'll wrap up here with some Wellington Phoenix, Flying Kiwis, and then we'll get into the NBL. I'll set up your Wellington Phoenix bit here with a stat for you. How many rounds in are we? Do you know? Do they do that?
How many rounds?
Yeah, whatever.
They've played 23 games. So.
23 games. That's a hefty sample size. Wellington Phoenix, numero uno in passing accuracy percentage, 84%. Shout out to the Wellington Phoenix. Best passing accuracy in the whole A-League, and they're doing pretty well. Since we last spoke on the podcast thing, they had a 2-1 win over Perth Glory, and on the weekend they had a 1-1 draw against Adelaide United. They are sitting second on the A-League ladder. Holy shit. Great times to be a Wellington Phoenix supporter, even with old mate Rudan. He's the coach of Western United, right? And they're 7th. So shout out to Mark Rudan, but you fucked that one up. Shout out to Ufuk Talay because you made the right move there. Talk us through the last 2 games for the Wellington Phoenix wildcard and just bits and bobs, however you want to do it. Off you go.
Yeah, righto. Well, so the first game out of restart was the one we talked about last week, where they lost 3-1 to Sydney. It was a confusing game in a few ways, but also an endearing game because I think if they didn't get the result, they showed the performance levels to think that they're just going to pick up where they left off, which is what we needed to see. Like, the most important thing we could have seen from them was what we saw. The game itself, Sydney going to win. They have now confirmed the minor premiers play it with the Phoenix only drawing on Saturday night. So that was going to happen inevitably. It didn't matter anyway. So the points there were just a sort of pretty much a bonus, and the most important thing to see was that this team weren't gonna need like an easing in period. A few individual players might. Some of the imports who were late back with the team certainly have. We haven't seen Hooper or De Vere, I don't think, play more than 45 minutes yet in any of these games, which is deliberate and probably, I think De Vere will start from now on, I'm pretty sure. And Talai has pretty much said it's going to be like full steam ahead the rest of the way. The game against Perth, it was closer to a full strength team, just with a couple of those little tweaks. This is the point at which they actually started having to get results, though. Like, it was a very important game to win, because had they lost, they might have been dragged back into the pack from Perth amongst that chasing pack. But with a win, they pushed themselves nice and clear to where it's all nicely in their control. And for 60-odd minutes, they were outstanding, especially sort of like the 10 minutes or so, we'll say about the 15 minutes or so in that second half. They were just knocking the ball around gloriously. They were tonal up. They were playing fantastic. Like, just silky football, too. Like, the tricks and flicks were coming out. They were so confident. It was incredible to watch. And then they conceded a little bit of a fluke as old dangerous Dane Ingham, All Whites International. Shout out to Anthony Hudson. Speaking of coaches with bad reputations that they've left behind since going away from New Zealand. Deflected in. Not much Marinovic could do about it, but it made it a bit of a contest. And for the last half hour, Phoenix were just sort of clinging on, trying to stay in the contest as Perth pressed on. But to be fair to them, like they sat quite deep. They made defensive substitutions. It got difficult to watch for a while there. But they did defend quite well. They defended nicely in structure. They closed it out. They got a very, very, very important 3 points to set up the rest of their season, which allowed Tele then to come into the game against Adelaide on Saturday night and say, well, we've got a lot of games coming up. We have a nice little rest that they're currently in the middle of. There's a 6 days off between that Adelaide game and playing Western Sydney on, I think it's Friday night. So in light of what is still to come and what is a pretty hefty fixture congestion, there was decided to rest about half the team to play against Adelaide. And incredibly, like, this is a point you can't really say it loud enough or with enough emphasis. Like, a Wellington Phoenix, more like it's more of a second 11 than it was a first 11 that played against Adelaide. Adelaide, a team currently sitting 6th, who are well in contention for playoffs, a competitive team at pretty much like close to full strength themselves. The Phoenix came away with a 1-1 draw, despite it all. A 1-1 draw, which could easily have been a 2-1 win. De Vere coming off the bench to miss a penalty late on. So it goes, like, sometimes you miss penalties, it can happen, but it just shows, like, the performance was good enough that they nearly won that game, despite playing with, a couple guys who had never started for the club before, a couple guys who hadn't even played, like, more than a handful of minutes throughout this whole season. It's just, like, the levels this team has been able to reach, like, I honestly can't think of another time in the history of the Wellington Phoenix where they could have played, like, it's not even a game in Wellington. It was technically a home game, but it was being played in Sydney. So, like, to be playing a game in Australia with a backup team named and to still be competitive enough that they're disappointed they didn't win it against a playoff caliber team, I just can't think of a time in the Phoenix's history where that ever would have been, like, a feasible possibility before, let alone something that actually happened, you know?
What are your, like, enjoyment levels watching the Phoenix? Like, I don't care for the Warriors right now. I don't enjoy watching the Warriors play. There's nothing about their style that excites me. There's nothing for me to cling to because the best players are lone players, so they're not going to be there. Like, however, I get high enjoyment, as I explained, watching the Melbourne Storm and watching their Kiwi players. So where do you just, like, sit with regards to, like, enjoying the Wellington Phoenix at this time?
So, everything you just said about the Warriors, make it the opposite, and that's about where we're at with the Phoenix, pretty much. Like, they're just, I don't know, they're playing enjoyable football. I mean, that stat you said about the pass completion thing was a surprise to me. Like, I didn't know that, and I wouldn't have guessed it either, because they do seem like a team that plays quite direct, but I guess it just shows how clinical they can be at the same time. Like, within that relatively direct style of play, they're also hitting their passes, they're hitting their marks. It was a very nice, a really pretty through ball from Piscopo, I think it was, to set up Soterio's goal against Adelaide, and there was, examples of that throughout the season as well. They're a really good team to watch. The style they play is fantastic. They got a lot of young, enjoyable players that the club has found, scouted, or developed. And I think that, one of the things Ufuk Talai said when he first took over, when he didn't hardly have a roster at all, was another factor, is that he had to basically rebuild this 3/4 of his team from fellows who were off contract after Rudin left. And he said, the biggest factor in keeping this team competitive and getting to the next level is going to be recruitment. Like, anything he can do as a coach depends on having the right players around. And honestly, his recruitment has been incredible. Like, Rudin signed some very good players, and he also signed some duds. Like, think of Mitch Nichols didn't work out too well, Ruben Wade didn't work out too well. Like, and just Talai hasn't missed. Like, everyone he signed has come in and been useful, and the proof in this. The proof is in the pudding of this game against Adelaide, where he was able to play guys like Callan Elliott, who hadn't even played a minute in this season up until coming on as an injury time sub against Sydney. Guys like Sam Sutton started that game, academy guy coming through, probably the best current academy player, along with Ben Wayne, that the club has on their books. someone like Brandon Wilson, who was signed a few weeks into the season, didn't look fantastic to start the game. Like, he took 10, 15 minutes to ease in, but I thought by the second half, the second half was fantastic. Another, like, strong midfield player who wasn't getting opportunities at other A-League clubs. I think he came from Perth beforehand. Cam Devlin's another one, absolute breakout player. Like, Wilson and Devlin are both Australians, but they're Australians that have been given an opportunity at the Phoenix. There's also a lot of young Kiwi fellas in similar positions. Te Atawhai Hudson-Wehongi had a very good game here. Liberato Kakache is a goddamn phenomenon, as everyone knows by this point. Like, the players are enjoyable to watch, the style of players enjoyable to watch, the results are there, so that's enjoyable as well. Like, they're just sort of what's the word? Well, you know, are they what do you call it? Like statement television, or I forget. There's a word for the must-watch factor.
Appointment viewing?
Appointment television. So they're appointment television at the moment.
I like it. I like it indeed. They're next in action next Friday, so big turnaround there. Get to rest up. Well, this Friday, sorry. And they play two of the bottom four teams. So they play Western Sydney Wanderers this week. Then they play Brisbane Roar, who are fourth. And then they come up against the Newcastle Jets, who are 8th out of 11th. So Newcastle Jets and Western Sydney are both in the bottom four. And so pretty much locked in for a top four finish there for the Wellington Phoenix. 2
points on that is Newcastle did beat Sydney, so they are a little bit competitive at the moment. But I mean, the Phoenix are playing well enough that that's 3 games that they are targeting 9 points out of. Like, the coach has already said as much, and I don't think they're officially guaranteed top 6. They're not going to miss out on it, but they should still get top 4. But top 2 is pretty crucial because we just seen them rest a few players for this game against Adelaide. If they get second, which they obviously can't finish higher than second, but they should finish second if they close out these games with 3 solid results. Finish second and you don't have to play in the first round of the playoffs, which effectively gets you an extra few days rest anyway, because I think with the congestion of it all, you got to play. If you do play in that first round, you've then got to back that up 3 days later or 4 days later or something like that, depending on how the seedings work. And if you go 120 minutes plus penalties in that first round, then you're in a bit of trouble to back that up a few days later. The Phoenix would definitely rather be the team coming off a bye to play that team than to be that team having to play the team coming off their bye. So I think that's a enormous factor, but it's also not officially in their hands because Melbourne City are only behind them by 1 goal difference point, but I don't really see Melbourne City winning all their games to finish. So for one thing, they play Sydney next. So that is, well, first of all, that is the main focus for the Wellington Phoenix, is to lock up that second place because it's the best boost they can give to their title chances on the old Wellington title quest. And also, it's achievable. It's there to be done, and we're going to see, Talai said, the resting was for this game in preparation for these 3. That's not going to happen again. Full strength 11s the rest of the way. It's very much doable, and that's the target. That's the goal for the rest of the way for the Welly Knicks.
Beauty. We'll wiggle over to the NBL. We'll finish with the NBL, and it's a massive week in NBL basketball. So it's finals week, and it's a bit all over the show. So you got a variety of different scenarios and situations. The game's locked in. So you've got an elimination final for Tuesday. Probably the day you're listening to this. Nelson Giants versus Canterbury Rams. And then you have a qualifying final between Otago Nuggets and Manawatu Jets. The winner of the elimination final on Tuesday night then plays the Auckland Huskies on Wednesday night. And the other elimination final on Wednesday night is Taranaki Airs versus Franklin Bulls. And then Thursday, straight up semi-finals. So that's good. Thursday night, you've got the 4 best teams. We had the couple of awards dished out as well. So the MVP of the NBL this couple of months was Tom Vodanovich from the Manawatu Jets. He had 101 votes. Jordan Ngatai from Otago Nuggets was second on 96 votes. Daron Rokawa was third, 96 votes with the Taranaki Mountaineers. The All-Star 5, first team All-NBL. Daron Rokawa, Isaiah Mariho'o Liafa with the Auckland Huskies, Jordan Ngatai with Otago, Marcel Jones with Taranaki, Tom Vodanovich with the Manawatu Jets. Coach of the Year, you had Brent Matahere, coach of the Otago Nuggets. Best Under-21s player, Tane Samuel. Defensive Player of the Year, Jared Kenny with Otago. And those are the big awards. You can roll through the MVP stuff, wildcard. You can take this however you want to take it, whatever you want to do. I'm looking at these awards in the presence of Isaiah Moriho'o Liafa in that All-Star 5, someone we talked a fair bit about during this NBL campaign. That's a massive nod. That's a great nod for a young dude coming in. I think he's coming out of college in the USA. First team All-NBL selection, All-Star 5 selection. Shout out Isaiah Mariho'o Liafa. You can talk about him. You can talk about Vodanovich winning the MVP. Up to you here, Wildcard.
Yeah, Mariho'o Liafa, also the co-defensive player of the year. They actually seem to, for some reason, give out 2. So Jared Kenny shared it with Liafa, which is nice. It's another aspect of his game because, man, Liafa is like, he can score, right? He can shoot, he can score, he can get to the rim, he can just be a big old, presence on offense. He's also a killer on-ball defender. Like, he's got quick hands, he's got really quick feet, he's just not going to give you an inch. I honestly, every time I watch him and be like, he's not overly big, he's not huge for his size or anything, but he's quick enough to make up for that. He just reminds me so much of, like, Shea Illy, except with a slightly better jump shot. And, like, the Breakers would probably have preferred to have kept Shea Illy. Like, he's a great fella for the locker room. He's a excellent player, like, coming off the bench. He didn't have a very good season that last year with the Breakers where he was playing as a starting point guard under Kevin Braswell, by the way, who was Liafa's coach at the Huskies. Didn't have the best season there, and then ended up asking for a release because he just saw that his minutes were going to be cut a lot by his sort of collateral damage in the RJ Hampton thing, bringing in a starting point guard out of college, investing in that guy. Illy didn't particularly like what that meant for him, so he asked for a release, was granted that release. So it just seems like Isaiah Mariho'o Liafa would be such a great, like, ready-made replacement to fill that same role. I know they also have old mate Jared Weeks as well as the point guard off the bench, so it is a little bit tricky. There is a little, but also, like, Mariho'o Liafa is a couple years back than Shea Illy's development was at that time, so he'd be more, like, willing to take that third guard role. I don't know. I just think he'd be such a good fit for that Breakers team. I'm sure he'll end up on an NBL roster, whether as a development player or whatever. I'm not sure his age. I think he's still young enough to be a development player. But he'd be about 23 or something, 23, 24. But I just think he'd be such a good fit for that team. And, whether that comes down to it or not, I have no idea. I have no idea what the Breakers think with their recruitment. I can't understand why they signed Dan Trist, for example, when they had a Kiwi fella like Tom Vodanovich playing as well as he has through this NBL season. There was there's probably a little bit of controversy about the MVP thing because of the way they did it. They did the sort of, like, game vote things where Daron Rokawa was well out in front, and he had an excellent case as well himself. He was third in the eventual things, but they also added in coaching voters, and I think there might have been some media votes, that kind of thing as well, to similar how they do it in the in the NBA, I guess, where you have a few different sort of elements contributing to the overall thing. And Vodanovic came out in the wash slightly ahead. I wouldn't argue with that. I think, I just think he was such an effective player so he's a big bastard shooting like 10 3-point attempts a night. Like, how do you defend that? What do you do against that? It's not much you can do. You just got to hope he misses. So, I mean, he had a fantastic season. Jordan Natai was also very good. He was second on the thing. There's a few other players you could chuck up in the mix there as well. Strong season from a lot of players that we've been talking about. And I do want to write about the awards and sort of breaking some of them down, just looking into the performances, why they won. At first I thought about it, I'd want like write my versions of this, but honestly, like looking at them, I'm not sure I would change anything. Like I think they've picked the right MVP. I think they've probably got the right All-Star 5. Not really gonna argue with Defensive Player of the Year either. There's one or two other fellas that could be in contention, but I think those two, Jared Kenny and Buddy Huhuliafa, are probably the two standouts. I was thinking to myself about Coach of the Year stuff as well, and just the quality of defense that the Nuggets have had, the late run they've been on, and the way they've sort of shaped up. I don't disagree with Brent Matahari getting that one either. Like, I just don't, I don't see a different. Maybe the one where you could maybe make an argument would be the youth player, where Tane Samuels won it. For Manawatu, you also had, like, for example, Tane Murray would have been very high in contention there as well, but Tane Murray missed a few extra games as well, and Tane Samuel was just solid lockdown, like playing the whole way through for Manawatu, looking excellent. I had no idea he was as young as he is. I knew he was young-ish because he hasn't been around that long, but surprised he doesn't look like a 21 years and underage player, but he doesn't play like one either. But excellent season. I don't know what to add apart from the contextual side of things when I write about it. I don't know what else to add to the awards things, because I think they've pretty much got it all hammer on nail there. I can't argue with much.
Take us into that Tall Blacks context to finish with. Like, who within the Tall Blacks bubble has bumped their stocks up the most? Or, like, who on the fringe of the Tall Blacks bubble has bumped their stocks up the most to, like, get into that Tall Blacks mixer?
Yeah, the Tall Blacks mixer always sort of depends on who's around and who's available and those kind of things. A few, like, most of these guys that we're talking about at the top tier have played some Tall Blacks. Jared Kenny obviously is a veteran, a long-time Tall Black. He obviously hasn't done his Tall Black stocks any harm with a strong season here. He wasn't going to do them any good either. Like, we know what we're getting with Jared Kenny. I think the guys who have probably made that boost up are the guys that, you could also say guys like Jordan Natai and Tom Vodanovic, who are both coming off contract with the Breakers, probably needed strong seasons. Like, they needed strong seasons to make sure the next wave doesn't overtake them on Tall Blacks duty. Also strong seasons to try get, like, additional NBL contracts. Those things are true. But I think the guys who have probably improved the most are the guys who've just been out of sight, out of mind for a couple years, which are those college fellas that I have written about and that we've talked about on the podcast. And Isaiah Le'afa is one of them. Sam Timmins would be another one. Jordan Hunt for Otago's done really well. Isaac Davidson, Jaden Bazant. Like, I don't know that those guys would necessarily be making a Tall Black squad if Pero Cameron were to be naming one tomorrow, but they're guys who might well have pushed themselves into, like, extended squad status. And if you're in extended squad status, then you're at least going to get to go to those kind of wider training camps and press your case even further and impress the coaches directly and that kind of stuff. Like, I think those are probably if we're talking about, like, breakout type players, I think that's probably where you got to be looking to those guys who haven't been on the scene so much the last few years because they've been away in America working on their game, getting a lot better, and then have come back for this NBL showdown to to present themselves as the product they've been working on, and showing what they're capable of now after their college experiences. And there's more than a few guys who have like taken that kind of opportunity, and just the extra spotlight that's been given to them as well by not having big imports or not having some of those top tier, like a lot of the NBL contracted Tall Blacks as well not being here. Just not having those players has kind of given those guys just a little bit of a boost in role and boost in usage and those things that has like led to the whole kind of breakout factor, I guess. It's given them the opportunity, and they've taken the opportunity. It's been beautiful to watch. Now we await the finals, don't we?
We sure do indeed, Wildcard. We've gone an almighty episode of the Newscast there, so we'll wrap it up, and
new record
will bounce back for next Monday, published Monday evening. Tuesday, email header is coming to you at the moment as well. Otherwise, enjoy the land of Aotearoa. Kia kaha, stay beautiful. Choo-choo!